The war in Ukraine is arguably defined by the ubiquity of drones and how to defend against them. Russia itself spent years building an anti-drone architecture around a simple principle. If your conventional radar and missile systems can't catch drones, maybe your men on the ground will. To that end, it used mobile fire teams, positioned along every likely drone approach corridor, armed with heavy machine guns and short-range weapons, waiting for low-flying Ukrainian platforms. It was crude, it was cheap, and for a while it worked. In fact, it was a tactic that Russia copied from Ukraine, given how ineffective their own drone strikes were against the makeshift defenses. But for Russia, that no longer seems to be working. After 4 years of the war, Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have begun equipping their strike drones with unguided aerial rockets, a weapon class that until now belonged to attacked aircraft and helicopters. Unmanned Systems Forces Commander Robert Brovdy decided to make the details of these developments very public, partly due to how Russia seems ill-equipped to answer the new threat. You see, Russia's mobile fire groups, the cornerstone of its low-altitude drone defense, now face a drone that can shoot back, and that changes everything. To explain exactly how, we need to dig into both the weapon being used and the problem it was designed to solve. The rockets in question belong to a family of munitions with a long and somewhat complicated history. NURS, Russian for Unguided Aviation Rocket, or its Ukrainian alternative NAR, covers the same class of weapons Western sources typically call UARs, or unguided aerial rockets. The two types Ukraine is fielding on drones are the S-5, a 57mm rocket, and the heavier S-8 at 80mm. Both are Soviet-era designs, and both have been used on nearly every continent where the Soviet Union or its successor states chose to fight. The S-5 is old enough that its origins trace back to 1946, when Soviet engineers began studying captured German R-4M rockets recovered at the end of World War II. The R-4M itself, nicknamed the Hurricane, had been a breakthrough in aerial combat, being a simple, unguided folding fin rocket that Luftwaffe pilots used to break up Allied bomber formations. The Soviets recognized the concept's potential and spent the next decade developing their own version. By the mid-1950s, the S-5 was entering service, initially as an air-to-air weapon for early jet fighters like the MiG-19, before the doctrine shifted and it became the standard close support rocket for the entire Soviet tactical aviation fleet. Afghanistan was where the S-5 was arguably most thoroughly tested. Soviet Su-25 and Mi-24 crews used them extensively against Mujahideen positions throughout the 1980s, but the feedback wasn't encouraging. The rockets fanned out after launch and dispersed away from the target rather than concentrating on it. One common assessment from that period was that the S-5 was more than good for little, as Soviet pilots anecdotally put it, tickling the enemy's heels. The warhead simply wasn't large enough to reliably kill scattered infantry in rugged terrain, and the unguided nature meant that getting the desired saturation effect required firing enormous quantities of rockets. More specifically, the rocket had a dispersion of 3.5 milliradians or MRADs, meaning that it would stray 3.5 meters off target for every kilometer it traveled. In imperial units, this is about 18.5 feet per mile. The Soviets eventually began mounting S-5 pods on T-62 tanks, BTR-70 armored personnel carriers, and Ural trucks as improvised ground-to-ground artillery, which tells you everything about how desperate they were for volume of fire and how far the weapon had drifted from its intended role. The S-8 was the natural upgrade for the S-5. Entering service in 1984, the larger 80mm rocket carried a more capable warhead, where the baseline shape charge variant could penetrate up to 400mm of rolled homogeneous armor. The rocket came in a range of specialized versions, including tandem charges for defeating reactive armor and fragmentation rounds for use against personnel and light vehicles. In the Second Chechen War, Russian aircraft fired S-8s in dense salvos of up to 20 rockets each, using them to crack fortified positions during the grinding assaults on Grozny. In Syria, Russian Aerospace Forces aircraft used S-8s extensively throughout their intervention, delivering suppressive fire against opposition-held positions across the country. And those are the two main types of rockets that Ukrainian drones are now carrying into Russian-occupied territory. So the weapon moved from air-to-air, to ground-to-ground, to air-to-ground combat, all over decades of doctrinal changes and strategic evolutions. Even then, within the current war in Ukraine, NARs have been present since the beginning. Ukrainian forces used both S-5 and S-8 rockets in the Donbass in the early phase of the full-scale invasion, operating in conditions that quickly proved how dangerous low-altitude close support had become against an adversary with modern short-range air defense. Ukrainian fixed-wing attack aircraft and helicopters used the rockets similarly to how they were originally intended. And in there, they suffered significant losses precisely because getting close enough to use them meant flying into the engagement range of Pantsir, Manpads, Tor, and Buk systems. While Russia was arguably incompetent in terms of mounting an overwhelming offensive, its anti-aircraft systems were still more than effective against Soviet-era threats. The pilots who survived adapted, pulling back to longer standoff distances, using lofting techniques, and accepting degraded accuracy in exchange for staying alive. But the rockets themselves remained in the inventory, waiting for a platform that could carry them to targets without being shot out of the sky on the way in. Finally, success. That platform turns out to be the FP2, produced by the Ukrainian company Firepoint. In military terms, the FP2 was designed specifically to meet frontline demand for a heavier strike drone with real-time operator control. It could originally carry a warhead of up to 220 pounds, had a range of approximately 230 miles, and could transmit a live video feed to the operator. The last point is crucial. It allows the flight path to be adjusted mid-mission. This is more similar to FPV, first-person view control, common to the drones we're used to seeing come out of Ukraine, rather than the traditional pre-programmed loitering munitions used by the West. In its standard configuration, the FP2 flies to its target and detonates, so the drone itself is the weapon. Firepoint and the unmanned systems forces have now added a secondary weapon system, rocket pods mounted under the wings. In the S-5 configuration, the drone carries 2 pylons with 4 rockets each, so 8 rockets in total, while retaining a smaller warhead as a payload. This was a key strategic development. From this, we can surmise Ukraine intended to launch the drone at a target, using the S-5s to clear the way from opposing anti-air units, typically Manpads, and then dig the drone into the target so it can explode. The confirmation that this strategy was actually taking place came in mid-May 2026. Magyar announced publicly that the rockets were being deployed from Ukrainian long-range drones at operational depths of up to 310 miles. But based on the technical specifications available, this almost certainly refers to the broader long-range UAV fleet operating at extreme depth, including platforms other than the FP2, given its maximum range is around 230 miles. However, some reports in late May 2026 suggested FP2s were upgraded to carry a 400-pound warhead up to 230 miles away, giving them a much wider reach. Given that the detailed specifications of the S-5 configuration are unlikely to be made public, the combination of several smaller S-5s or S-8s with a smaller warhead may mean that the FP2 could have its range increased to over 310 miles, which is what the announcement suggested. Another possibility is that the announcement is about broader UAV activities, of which FP2s are only a single part. Regardless of the distinction, it's clear that Ukraine has started using rocket-armed drones at distances previously reserved for conventional aircraft and standoff loitering munitions. On May 12, footage appeared that had been circulated by open-source analysts showing a drone in flight over Russian-occupied Crimea, releasing a rocket from under its wing toward a target below before continuing on its course to its primary objective. The target was identified as a Russian mobile fire group. The drone fired and kept flying. Dennis Schlieterman, co-founder of Firepoint, commented on the footage with a simple acknowledgement. His company could do this. While not outright confirming it, the comment indicated that the drone in question was either an FP2 or its longer-range cousin, the FP1. A confirmed combat application followed a week later, where an FP2 armed with rockets struck a strategic communications hub of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. That's hardened military infrastructure, struck by a drone that's now also carrying rockets for the approach. What this development suggests beyond the near term is worth dwelling on. Ukraine has now demonstrated that a strike drone can carry functional rocket armament alongside its primary warhead. The logical next step in that progression, which is already being discussed in Ukrainian defense circles, is not merely improving the current unguided rocket configuration, but asking what happens when you scale up. If an FP2 class airframe can carry 8 S-5 rockets and a 200-pound warhead, a larger or extended range derivative could theoretically replace guided air-to-surface munitions. Ukraine already operates a domestic family of guided weapons, and the question of whether a sufficiently capable drone could serve as an air-launched platform for a small precision-guided missile is no longer purely theoretical. Remember, the FP2 we know of as of mid-2026 is an iteration of the earlier design meant for mid-range combat, which has already seen its range and carrying capacity nearly double. Given that, it's not completely out of the realm of possibilities to see the proposed 310-mile range with a full payload armament. To understand why even the current configuration is so disruptive, you have to understand how Russia has tried to solve the drone problem over the past 3 years, and how systematically each solution has been rendered obsolete. But before that, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show. We post videos every day detailing the newest developments in military science, geopolitics, and warfare. Back to Russia. Its first major response to Ukraine's drone campaign was electronic warfare. Russia deployed what analysts have described as the densest electronic warfare environment in modern history, intended to strip Ukrainian drones of the signals they depended on. GPS jamming degraded navigation. Radio frequency jamming attacked the control links that FPV drone operators used to steer their platforms. Broadband systems attempted to blind the sensors feeding targeting data to Ukrainian strikes. For a period, this worked well enough to impose meaningful losses. Ukrainian FPV drones lost their video feeds mid-flight, meaning operators flew blind and drones missed or crashed. The next answer was to eliminate the radio link. Fiber optic FPV drones would carry a spool of hair-thin optical cable, thinner than a human hair, that unspools behind the drone as it flies. Control signals and video travel through the fiber as pulses of light rather than radio waves. There is no radio frequency for jamming systems to detect, disrupt, or spoof. The drone passes through the most saturated electronic warfare environment on the battlefield as if that environment doesn't exist. Both sides started using fiber optic drones, and both attempted to counter them with different means. The most common was simple kinetic responses, including fragmentation charges, netting, or even having drones physically intercept one another. NATO's own Allied Transformation Command formally acknowledged the problem, issuing a request for innovative solutions to defeat fiber optic FPV drones because existing systems had no answer for them. Then Ukraine added AI-assisted visual guidance to certain platforms, allowing drones to autonomously identify and track targets even if the fiber cable broke or the operator lost connection in the final approach. The AI systems themselves have thousands of different developers, either working in unison or creating diverging designs to make the drones more persistent and less hackable. This led to an adaptation and development cycle that far outpaced what conventional Western procurement could manage. Where new systems were previously tested over years, Ukraine was practically forced to go from prototype to field deployment in weeks. Russia was forced to adopt the same tempo, developing a possible countermeasure only for Ukrainian engineers to begin overcoming it within weeks before it could even be distributed across the entire front. In particular, the Pantsir air defense system, built around the premise of engaging medium-altitude aerial targets with radar-guided missiles and guns, has proven consistently inadequate against small, low-observable drones with minimal radar cross-sections. By early 2026, Ukraine claimed it destroyed half of Russia's Pantsir systems in its occupied territory, sometimes by the exact category of drone they were positioned to counter. Russia needed an answer. The Mobile Fire Group network was Russia's response to the failure of its electronic and missile-based defenses against low-altitude drone threats. If sophisticated technology couldn't reliably stop small, cheap drones, then put armed soldiers at the likely approach point and let them shoot the drones down with machine guns. It was a return to basics, low-tech, distributed, and difficult to suppress electronically, and it imposed real costs on Ukrainian drone operations. Drones that could navigate through GPS jamming and radio frequency disruption could still be engaged by a well-positioned team with heavy weapons. Russia built this network specifically because it represented a category of threat that electronic countermeasures couldn't address. The armed FP2 closes that loop. The Mobile Fire Group was designed as the solution to electronic warfare's limitations against drones. The rocket-armed drone is the solution to the Mobile Fire Group's threat to drones. The key distinction from previous adaptations to countermeasures is that this one takes lives. A jammed drone crashes. An armed drone, if it detects a fire team trying to intercept it, simply firebacks with rockets specifically meant to kill infantry before it continues to its target. The broader operational picture that emerges from this development was described clearly by defense industry expert Anatoly Krapchinsky, who heads an arms manufacturing company. Instead of one large aircraft carrying a diverse weapons load, for example a B-2 bomber or an F-35, Ukraine deploys coordinated swarms where each drone has a defined function. Strike drones carrying heavy warheads go for the primary target. Rocket-armed escort drones suppress or destroy anything that tries to intervene on the way in. This creates a two-pronged threat, since the individual drones are much more capable than they were when the war started, and the swarm creates a new comprehensive challenge that can't be solved through traditional interception missiles. The reason for this is simple physics and economics. For the standard missile-outfitted aircraft, you'd use an interceptor platform like the Patriot to shoot down the offending missile or the aircraft carrying it. When the interceptor cost a few $1 million, shooting down a $100 million plane makes sense. But when you're trying to take down multiple cheap drones, suddenly the interceptor starts looking like a waste of time and money. The swarm design also creates compounding problems for detection and electronic interference. Ukraine frequently mixes drones using internal combustion engines with drones using jet propulsion, and the two produce fundamentally different radar and acoustic signatures. A radar system optimized for one signature profile will struggle against the other, and reconfiguring detection parameters in real time is not something air defense operators can reliably execute. Even then, the point of the new drones is not necessarily to destroy the air defense. All it needs is to force the anti-air mobile crews to hide, change positions, or stop working long enough for other drones to pass through. Ukraine's deep strike operations have always been constrained less by range than by the challenge of getting through the defensive corridor between the line of contact and the target. Each penetration is a separate operation, requiring planning, timing, and often the expenditure of additional platforms to suppress the defense. Armed drones don't solve that problem completely, but they reduce the cost of every individual crossing. The future of this technology is already visible in what Ukraine has done in other domains, such as the development trajectory of the Magura V5 naval drone. The Magura began as a surface drone, a semi-autonomous kamikaze boat designed to ram and detonate against Russian naval vessels. It sank warships or damaged naval infrastructure. Russia responded by deploying helicopter patrols to intercept the boats before they could reach their targets, because a helicopter can find and engage a surface drone before the drone closes to striking range. Ukraine's answer to the helicopter threat was to arm the Magura V5 with R-73 air-to-air missiles, a dogfighting missile originally carried by MiG-29 and Su-27 fighters. This was essentially adapted as a surface-to-air weapon for a boat. In late 2024, a Magura V5 used those missiles to shoot down a Russian Mi-8 helicopter in occupied Crimea. A surface boat, designed to attack ships, shot down a helicopter that was sent to stop it. And it didn't stop there. The Magura V7 was subsequently fitted with AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. In 2025, one of these platforms shot down two Russian Su-30 fighter bombers that were attempting to intercept the drone formation, which was the first time in history that a manned combat aircraft had been destroyed by an unmanned surface vessel. This closely parallels FP2's current trajectory. Ukraine used or designed a single-purpose platform, managed to make headway in that role, encountered a specific countermeasure, and then upgraded the platform with weapons specifically designed to defeat that countermeasure while retaining its original capability. The next step in the Magura trajectory is to scale the weapons, extend the range, and make new targets available to it. This translates directly onto the FP2's stated development roadmap. Firepoint has already pushed FP2's range to 230 miles. The next step after that could be laser guidance on the rockets, replacing unguided area effect munitions with a system that can track and hit moving targets. NAR integration on the FP2 is not a decisive development by itself. The rockets are old. The drone platform, while capable, is not in itself a revolution in airframe design. What's significant is the combination, the confirmation that the combination is operational, and the pace at which Ukraine is iterating toward the next version of it. Russia built a layered defensive architecture against Ukrainian drones, and each layer has been systematically identified, targeted, and rendered less effective. Electronic warfare failed to stop fiber optic drones. Missile-based air defense proved inadequate against small, low-observable platforms. Mobile fire groups provided genuine resistance, and now those groups are being suppressed on approach and forced to disperse. And all data points to Russia slowly losing its ability to keep pace with Ukraine's development. Remember, back in 2022, it was Russia that started with the drone advantage. Russia was the one that introduced fiber optic drones first, and Ukraine copied within a month. Russia used glide bombs to create an unguided long-range saturation bombardment system, and Russia developed electronic warfare to counter FPV drones. But after 2025, Russia started to respond to Ukraine's threats. It had to overhaul tanks to survive drone swarms, and that attempt was laughed at. It kept losing radar and interceptor systems. And now, it's losing the only remaining defense it has: actual people. Given that its air forces are being grounded, its armored vehicles are losing armor, and its people are losing lives, Russia is starting to lose. And it may only be a matter of time before we start seeing videos of Ukraine's drones being completely unchallenged in the sky. But that's also because Russia is slowly collapsing from within. To learn more, check out this video, and make sure you've hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with the most recent developments in the war in Ukraine and global geopolitics.